She was left alone in the middle of a field, with no one around, until out of nowhere a horse showed up and completely changed the course of a story no one was ready to hear. The scorching sun of rural Georgia seemed to have chosen that day to show all its merciless power. Rachel Sanders adjusted the sunscreen on her arms while observing through the car window the monotonous landscape of sugarcane fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. At 26, she had grown accustomed to her father's silence during trips, but on that day there was something different in the air. Michael Sanders drove with tense hands on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched, and his eyes fixed on the dusty road. "Dad, where are we going again?" asked Rachel, trying to break the heavy atmosphere that hung inside the luxury sedan. "You said it was to take care of some business, but we've been driving for more than 2 hours." Michael cleared his throat without taking his eyes off the road. "It's about the family's old land. You need to know an important place." His voice sounded strange, as if each word cost a tremendous effort. Rachel frowned. Since the accident that had left her in a wheelchair at 15, her relationship with her father had become even more distant. Michael, a successful businessman, known throughout Meadowview for his coldness in business dealings, had never known how to deal with his daughter's disability. He preferred to pretend she didn't exist, keeping her away from the social commitments and public appearances he valued so much. "What land, Dad? You never told me about this." Rachel tried once more to start a conversation, but the answer came only as an incomprehensible mutter. The car began to slow down, turning onto a dirt road that cut through the middle of an apparently abandoned plantation. The canes were tall, yellowed by the sun, and swayed in the wind, creating an unsettling sound, like ancient whispers that held long-forgotten secrets. "We're here," announced Michael, stopping the car in a clearing in the middle of the sugarcane field. The silence that followed was broken only by the rustling of dry leaves and the distant song of some solitary bird. Rachel looked around, confused. "We're where, Dad? I don't see anything here besides sugarcane." She tried to keep her voice calm, but a strange sensation began to form in her chest. Michael got out of the car without answering and walked to the trunk. Rachel heard the metallic sound of the wheelchair being removed and assembled. When he appeared at the passenger door, his face was paler than she had ever seen. "I need you to get out," he said, avoiding looking directly into his daughter's eyes. "What do you mean? What are we going to do here in the middle of nowhere?" Rachel's voice began to tremble, not just from confusion but from a terrible premonition growing inside her. Michael helped her out of the car and into the chair, his movements mechanical and distant. "Rachel," he began, finally looking at her, but there was something dead in his eyes. I can't anymore." "Can't what, Dad?" Her heart raced. "What are you talking about?" "I can't pretend anymore that you aren't a burden." The words came out like stabs. "Since the accident, since you became like this, my life has been hell. I can't look at you without remembering the failure, without remembering everything that went wrong." Rachel felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her. "Dad, for God's sake, what are you saying? I'm your daughter." "You were my daughter." His voice was ice cold. "Now you're just a constant reminder of everything we lost. Your mother isn't here anymore to blame me, but every time I look at you, I see the disappointment in her eyes." Tears began to roll down Rachel's face. "Dad, please don't talk like that. We can talk, we can work this out. If you want, I can live somewhere else. It's already decided." Michael walked back to the car, his steps firm and determined. "You're going to stay here. Someone will come to get you, eventually." "Dad, no!" Rachel screamed, trying to move the chair toward him, but the wheels sank into the soft earth. "You can't abandon me here! Dad!" The car engine roared, and Michael left without looking back, leaving only a cloud of red dust that slowly settled over the wheelchair and over Rachel's despair. The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel remained there, alone, in the middle of that sea of canes, trying to process what had just happened. The tears dried quickly in the scorching heat, but the pain in her chest seemed only to increase. For a few endless minutes, she just breathed, trying to think of a solution. Her cell phone had no signal in this place forgotten by God. The dirt road they had arrived on was lost on the horizon, and she had no idea how long it would take to reach any inhabited place. That's when she heard it. At first she thought it was her imagination, but the sound repeated. Footsteps. Not of people, but of something larger, heavier. Her heart raced with fear. It could be any wild animal, and she would have no way to defend herself or escape. Between the rows of cane, a shadow began to form. Large, imposing, moving with an elegance that contrasted with the arid environment. When it finally emerged completely into view, Rachel held her breath. It was a horse, a beautiful animal with light brown coat and a mane that shone golden under the strong sun. Its eyes were intelligent, almost human, and it observed her with curiosity that seemed almost affectionate. The horse approached slowly, unhurried, as if it knew exactly what it was doing. It stopped a few meters from her and lowered its head, breathing deeply. At that moment, something inexplicable happened. Rachel felt she was no longer alone. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. The horse remained there, motionless, as if waiting for some reaction from Rachel. She wiped the tears with the back of her hand, trying to maintain composure in front of this majestic animal that seemed to have appeared from nowhere. "Hi, boy," she whispered, slowly extending her hand. "Where did you come from?" The horse took a step forward and sniffed her hand, then gently touched its muzzle to her palm. The touch was warm and comforting, and for the first time since her father had abandoned her, Rachel felt a spark of hope. "You don't have an owner, do you?" she asked, running her fingers through the silky mane. "Were you also abandoned here?" As if understanding her words, the horse shook its head and walked around the chair, observing the terrain carefully. Its movements were precise, calculated, as if analyzing the best route to some destination only it knew. Suddenly, it stopped and looked fixedly in a specific direction of the sugarcane field, whinnying softly. Rachel followed its gaze and noticed that among the taller canes there was an almost imperceptible trail, as if someone had passed through there before. "Do you want to show me something?" she asked, more to herself than to the animal. The horse positioned itself beside the chair and began to gently push it with its muzzle, directing it toward the narrow trail. Rachel hesitated for a moment. Following an unknown horse through an abandoned sugarcane field seemed crazy, but what other options did she have? "All right," she decided, holding the wheels of the chair firmly. "You seem to know what you're doing better than I do." Meanwhile, 20 kilometers away in the small district of Hope Village, Jimmy Oliver was adjusting the equipment at the community radio station where he worked on Saturday afternoons. At 17, he was known for his insatiable curiosity and his natural talent for uncovering interesting stories in the region. Hello, this is Hope Radio, playing the best country music and bringing information to our entire community." He spoke into the microphone, testing the sound. "In a few minutes, we'll have the Saturday Conversations program, where you can call in and tell your stories." While organizing the records, Jimmy noticed strange interference in the equipment. Unusual static came from time to time, interspersed with what seemed to be distant voices. He put on the headphones and turned up the volume, trying to identify where those sounds were coming from. "How strange," he muttered, fiddling with the controls. "I've never heard anything like this before." In the plantation, Rachel and her new companion followed the winding trail. The horse, which she had mentally decided to call Brave, moved with confidence, occasionally stopping to sniff the air or look around, like an attentive bodyguard alert to possible dangers. "Brave," she said aloud, testing the name. "That's what I'll call you. You're brave enough to help me when everyone else abandoned me." The horse whinnied softly, as if approving the choice of name. After almost an hour of difficult walking through the uneven terrain, they reached a clearing where stood an old and apparently abandoned building. It was a wooden cottage with walls worn by time and clay tiles covered in moss. Despite its decadent appearance, the structure seemed solid. Brave stopped in front of the wooden door and looked at Rachel, as if saying, "We've arrived." "Do you want me to go in there?" she asked, observing the building with apprehension. "How do you know it's safe?" The horse walked to the door and pushed it with its muzzle. The wood creaked but yielded, revealing a surprisingly well-preserved, Interior. There was old furniture covered in dust, faded photographs on the walls, and personal objects scattered about, as if the residents had left in a hurry and never returned. Rachel maneuvered the chair into the cottage and immediately felt a shiver down her spine. It wasn't fear, but a strange feeling of familiarity, as if she had been there before. "My God," she whispered, picking up a framed photograph from the central table. The image showed a family, a young couple and a small boy, all smiling in front of the same house where she now found herself. There was something about the boy's face that intrigued her, something familiar. Brave entered the cottage and walked to a specific corner where it began to dig the packed earth floor with its hooves. After a few minutes, it managed to unearth a small leather backpack, old and worn. "What is this?" Rachel approached and carefully picked up the backpack. Inside she found more photographs, some yellowed letters, and a partially damaged document. One of the photographs immediately caught her attention. It showed a young man next to a light-colored Colt, identical to Brave. Her hands trembled when she read the name written on the back of the photo. Michael Sanders, 1983. "It can't be," she murmured, looking alternately at the photo and at Brave. "That's my father. And this horse." At the radio station, Jimmy decided to investigate the interference more thoroughly. He called his friend Marcus, who worked at the local telephone company. "Marcus, have you noticed anything strange in the signals around there? I'm picking up some very weird interference." "Now that you mention it," Marcus replied, "some residents in the rural area called complaining about problems with the telephone line. They say they hear strange noises and sometimes even voices of people asking for help." Jimmy sat down in the chair, intrigued. "Voices asking for help? What kind of voices?" "Mainly one seems to be a young woman, but it could just be a technical problem, right?" After hanging up, Jimmy couldn't get that information out of his head. His instinct as a born journalist told him there was a story there. He decided to make some calls to investigate if anyone had recently disappeared in the region. Back at the cottage, Rachel continued examining the documents found in the backpack. Among the letters, one in particular caught her attention. It was addressed to Mary Sanders and talked about the forced sale of the family property. "Mary Sanders," she repeated the name. "That was my grandmother whom I never knew." Brave approached and rested its head on her shoulder, as if wanting to console her. At that moment, Rachel understood that her story was much more intertwined with that place than she had ever imagined. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky orange and red. Soon it would be dark, and she would need to decide what to do: stay there until someone appeared, or try to find a way back to civilization. Night fell quickly over the sugarcane field, bringing with it a damp cold that made Rachel shiver. She had found an old blanket inside the cottage and settled into the only armchair that seemed safe enough to support her weight. Brave remained near the door like a vigilant sentinel, occasionally going out to patrol the surroundings and returning with a reassuring whinny. "You're really not an ordinary horse, are you?" murmured Rachel, observing the almost human behavior of the animal. "It's as if you know exactly what to do." She turned her attention to the documents spread out on the improvised table she had set up with a board over two old chairs. Besides the photographs, there were letters dating back more than 20 years, some with notary stamps and others handwritten with a delicate and feminine calligraphy. One of the letters, addressed to Mary Sanders and signed by Louise, particularly, caught her attention. "Dear Mary, I know you're worried about Michael. The boy is very angry since he learned the truth about the lands. Be patient with him. The anger passes, but wounds take time to heal. Thunder misses him too. Every day I see the horse looking at the road, waiting for him to come back. One day, he will understand that abandoning his roots doesn't bring happiness." "Thunder," Rachel whispered, looking at Brave. "Could it be—" The horse turned its head toward her upon hearing the name, its eyes shining in the faint light of the oil lamp she had managed to light. Meanwhile, in Hope Village, Jimmy couldn't sleep. The interference on the radio and the information about voices asking for help deeply disturbed him. He decided to seek out Mrs. Louise, the most respected midwife in the region, known for her prodigious memory and for knowing the history of all the local families. Mrs. Louise's house was in the oldest part of the village, a simple brick construction surrounded by a garden full of medicinal plants. Even though it was almost midnight, there was light in the kitchen window. "Mrs. Louise?" Jimmy knocked lightly on the door. "It's Jimmy from the radio. Can you talk to me?" The door opened, revealing a woman of approximately 70 years, short and plump, with grey hair tied in a bun and eyes that seemed to hold all the secrets of the world. "Jimmy, my child, what are you doing here at this hour? Did something happen?" "It's just, do you know the Sanders family? Michael Sanders, the businessman?" Mrs. Louise's face immediately closed. "Why do you want to know about the Sanders?" "I'm investigating some strange interference on the radio, and their name came up in some conversations. Did you know they had properties in the rural area?" Mrs. Louise sighed deeply and motioned for Jimmy to enter. "Sit down, boy. I'll make some tea and tell you a story that many people prefer to be forgotten." In the cottage, Rachel continued reading the letters by the faint light of the lamp. One of them, dated 1995, revealed disturbing details. "Mary, I can't stand to see you suffer anymore because of Michael. The boy is ashamed of where he comes from, of our simple traditions. Ever since he married that city girl and started making money, it's as if he had erased all our history, and now he wants to sell his parents' house, the house where you were born. Don't let him do this, Mary. This land has roots too deep to be sold to strangers." "So that was it," Rachel murmured, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fit together. "My father sold the family lands and then regretted it, or tried to hide that he did it." Thunder approached and deposited something at the feet of her chair. It was a rusty piece of metal that seemed to have been part of a sign or billboard. She examined it in the lamplight and managed to decipher some letters. T. Fran. St. Francis. Something, she tried to complete. "Did you find this nearby?" "The say." Horse nodded affirmatively and walked toward the door, looking at her as if wanting her to follow. "Not now, Thunder. It's too dark and dangerous." She stroked the animal's neck. "Tomorrow morning we'll explore more." In Mrs. Louise's house, the lemon balm tea steamed in the cups as the old midwife began her narrative. "The Sanders family was always respected here in the region, Jimmy. Michael's grandfather Vincent was a hard-working man who started with nothing and built a small but prosperous farm. St. Francis Farm was its name." "St. Francis!" Jimmy exclaimed. "So that's what the sign means." "What sign, boy?" "Oh, it's just something I heard about. Please continue." "Well, Vincent married Mary, who was a saint of a woman. They raised Michael with much love, but the boy was always ambitious. When he grew up and got married, he began to be ashamed of his humble origins. He wanted to enter high society in the city, you understand." Jimmy was noting everything in a small notebook, and what happened to the farm. Vincent and Mary grew old, and Michael convinced them to sell the property to him so he could invest in business in the city. He promised that he would take good care of the land, that he would maintain the family tradition. Mrs. Louise paused to take a sip of tea, her eyes saddening. "Lies. As soon as his parents passed away, he sold everything to a sugarcane company and used the money to set up his first business." "And his parents, what did they do when they found out?" "Mary was devastated. She died shortly after, some say, of heartbreak. Vincent lasted a few more years, but he never spoke to his son again. When he passed away too, he left a letter saying he cursed Michael for having betrayed the family roots." Jimmy felt a chill. What kind of curse? That he would lose everything he had gained through betrayal, and that he would never know true happiness. That the mistakes of the past would come back to haunt him. Mrs. Louise looked directly into the young man's eyes. "And you know something, Jimmy? It seems the curse is being fulfilled." "How so?" "Michael lost his wife a few years ago in a terrible accident. His daughter became disabled, and he never managed to accept it. His business has been going badly lately. I heard he owes a fortune. And there's more." "What?" "Yesterday I saw him passing through the village, driving like crazy, alone in the car. But when he passed in front of here, I could have sworn I saw a young woman in the passenger seat. When I looked again, the car was empty, just him." In the cottage, Rachel had fallen asleep in the armchair, surrounded by the letters and photographs that told the tragic story of her family. Thunder remained awake, standing guard, his ears attentive to any suspicious sound that might come from the sugarcane field. Around 3 in the morning, a strange noise made the horse stand up abruptly. It wasn't the wind in the canes nor some nocturnal animal. It was the sound of an engine approaching slowly, as if someone was trying to arrive without being noticed. Thunder whinnied softly, waking Rachel. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, still sleepy. The horse pointed its head toward the trail they had come on. Through the window pane, Rachel could see car headlights moving slowly between the canes, stopping and starting again, as if someone was looking for something. Or someone. Rachel held her breath as she saw the headlights approaching. Her heart raced when she recognized the sound of the engine. It was the same car that had brought her here. Had Michael returned? Had he changed his mind about abandoning her? "Dad?" she whispered, a mixture of hope and fear dominating her thoughts. Thunder, however, showed clear signs of agitation. His ears were pricked, and he snorted softly as if sensing danger. The horse positioned itself strategically between Rachel and the door in a defensive posture. The engine stopped a few hundred meters from the cottage, but the headlights remained on, slowly scanning the surrounding vegetation. Rachel could hear muffled voices, but it was not possible to distinguish how many people there were or what they were saying. "It's not my father," she murmured, observing Thunder's behavior. "You know it's not him, don't you, boy?" The horse nodded its head vigorously, confirming her suspicion. In some mysterious way, Thunder seemed capable of distinguishing between known people and strangers, between good and bad intentions. The voices approached, accompanied by the sound of heavy footsteps stepping on the dry vegetation. Rachel quickly extinguished the lamp and hid behind the armchair, while Thunder moved silently through the house, checking all the windows. "Are you sure it was here?" a male voice asked, clearly irritated. "The information I received said she was in this region," another man replied with a different accent, "but she may have already left here." "If the old man lied to us..." "Calm down. Let's take a look at this abandoned house. If she was here, she must have left traces." Rachel covered her mouth with her hands to muffle her accelerated breathing. Who were these men? How did they know she was there? And why did they refer to her father as the old man? Thunder approached her and gently touched her shoulder with his muzzle, then pointed his head toward the back of the house. There was a secondary door that she hadn't noticed before, half hidden behind a pile of old furniture. "Good idea," she whispered, silently moving the chair in the direction indicated by the horse. The men reached the front door and began to force it. The old wood creaked but resisted the first pushes. "Be careful not to make too much noise," said one of them. "If there's someone in there, we don't want them to escape." Rachel and Thunder managed to exit through the back, just as the front door finally gave way. She hid behind an old abandoned henhouse, while the horse disappeared into the darkness of the sugarcane field. Through the cracks in the rotten wood, she could see the men's flashlights sweeping the interior of the cottage. They were two, dressed in dark clothes, and seemed to be looking for something specific. "Someone was here recently," said one of them, probably examining signs of occupation. "Look at these letters scattered around. Take everything that seems important. The boss will want to see." Rachel watched in despair as they collected all the photographs and documents she had found. In a few minutes, they took away the only clues she had about her family history. "And now?" asked one of the men. "Now we go back and report. If she's alive and walking around here, she can't be far. Tomorrow we'll come back with more people and search the entire region." They left the cottage and walked back to the car. Rachel remained hidden until the sound of the engine completely dissipated in the distance, then quietly called for Thunder. The horse emerged from the shadows a few minutes later, bringing in its mouth one of the photographs that had fallen. During the confusion, it was the image of young Michael next to the colt. "At least we saved one," she sighed, putting the photo in her shirt pocket. In Hope Village, Mrs. Louise and Jimmy had spent the night talking about the history of the Sanders family. When the first ray of sun appeared on the horizon, the old midwife got up and walked to the kitchen window. "Jimmy," she said, her voice heavy with concern. That horse that's been appearing around the sugarcane fields. Have you heard about it? I've heard some residents commenting. Why? If it's who I think it is, then the situation is more serious than we imagined. Mrs. Louise turned to face the young man. That horse belonged to Vincent, Michael's father. Its name is Thunder, and it disappeared the day the old man received the news that his son had sold the farm. But that was more than 20 years ago. It's not possible it's the same animal. Horses can live up to 30 years, Jimmy. And Thunder was a special animal, very intelligent. Vincent always said it understood people better than most, humans. She paused, lost in memories. If it's appearing now, it's because something important is happening. What kind of thing? I don't know, but I have a bad feeling. I think someone from the Sanders family is in danger. At that same moment, Rachel and Thunder were watching the sunrise from a small elevation near the cottage. She had managed to find water in an abandoned artesian well and refreshed herself a bit, but hunger was beginning to tighten. "We need to find help, Thunder," she said, caressing the horse's neck. "But we can't trust just anyone. Those men, they knew where to find me. Someone sent them here." The horse whinnied in agreement and pointed with its head to a specific direction. On the horizon, Rachel could see what appeared to be smoke rising from a chimney. "There are people over there, but how do we know if we can trust them?" Thunder went down the elevation and returned a few minutes later, bringing something in its muzzle. It was a white cloth with delicate embroidery and the initials LS in golden thread. "LS," Rachel murmured, examining the fabric. "Louise Smith? Could it be—" The horse nodded its head vigorously, as if confirming her assumption. "You know this Louise, don't you? Can she help us?" Once again, Thunder confirmed with a nod. "Then let's find her," Rachel decided, putting the handkerchief away. "But first, tell me one thing. You're really Thunder, aren't you? My grandfather's horse?" The animal approached and touched its forehead to hers, such a caring and human gesture that it made her eyes fill with tears. "You came to find me," she whispered. "You've been waiting all these years to find me." Thunder whinnied softly, as if saying, "I've always been here, waiting for you to come home." As they prepared to leave the cottage and seek Mrs. Louise, Rachel couldn't imagine that, at that exact moment, her father was in his office in the city receiving a call that would change everything. "Mr. Sanders," said a cold voice on the other end of the line, "your problems may be solved. We found traces of her." Michael closed his eyes, a mixture of relief and remorse dominating his thoughts. "And now?" "Now you fulfill your part of the deal, the deeds to the old lands, as agreed." "But I've already told you I don't have them anymore." "Don't lie. To us, Mr. Sanders. We know exactly what you possess, and if you don't cooperate, your daughter may find more problems than just being lost in the middle of the sugarcane field." If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. The walk to Hope Village was longer and more difficult than Rachel had imagined. Thunder had to stop several times to allow her to rest, especially when the wheelchair wheels got stuck in the soft earth or stumbled on the roots that cut across the improvised path. "Almost there, girl," she murmured to herself, observing the smoke that became closer with each kilometer traveled. "Thunder, are you sure this Louise can help us?" The horse whinnied softly and quickened its pace as if feeling they were being followed. From time to time, it stopped and looked back, ears pricked and alert. It was when they reached the first house in the village that the miracle happened. Mrs. Louise was watering her medicinal plants in the yard when she saw Thunder emerge from the sugarcane trail, carefully pushing a wheelchair with a young woman. The old midwife let the watering can fall to the ground, bringing her hands to her chest. "My God in heaven," she exclaimed. "Thunder, is it really you, my old friend?" The horse whinnied loudly and galloped toward the fence, touching its muzzle to Mrs. Louise's extended hand. Tears ran down the wrinkled face of the woman. "More than 20 years," she whispered, caressing the already graying mane of the animal. "I knew you would return when it was necessary." Rachel approached, still stunned by the familiarity between Mrs. Louise and Thunder. "You really know him. He brought me here." Mrs. Louise looked at her carefully, and her eyes widened in surprise. "My goodness, and you are—" Rachel Sanders, Michael's daughter, Mary's granddaughter. The midwife immediately opened the gate. "Come in, my child, come in. You must be exhausted. And hungry too, I bet." As Rachel maneuvered the chair into the yard, Mrs. Louise whispered something in Thunder's ear. The horse nodded in agreement and ran off toward Jimmy's house. "Where did he go?" Rachel asked. "To get Jimmy. You're going to need help, and he's a trustworthy boy." Mrs. Louise helped her enter the house. "But first tell me what happened. How did you end up in the middle of the sugarcane field?" While preparing a hearty breakfast, Rachel told the whole story of the abandonment, the encounter with Thunder, the discovery of the cottage, and the nocturnal visit of the mysterious men. "They took all the photographs and letters," she concluded, showing the only photo that had survived. "I don't understand who they were or what they wanted with me." Mrs. Louise examined the photograph carefully. "I know this photo. It was taken the day Vincent gave Thunder to your father. Michael was 16 and promised to take care of the horse forever." Her voice filled with sadness. One more promise he broke. "Can you explain to me what really happened? Why does my father hate me so much?" Before Mrs. Louise could answer, Jimmy arrived running, with Thunder at his side. "Mrs. Louise!" "The horse came to my house and kept whinnying until I followed him." Jimmy stopped abruptly upon seeing Rachel. "Wow, you're the missing young woman." "Missing?" Rachel frowned. "What do you mean?" "Your father filed a missing person report last night, said you left home and never came back. The police are looking for you." Mrs. Louise and Rachel exchanged worried looks. "Jimmy," said the teammate, "midwife, close the door and sit here. I need to tell something to both of you." The young man obeyed, intrigued. Mrs. Louise served coffee for everyone and sighed deeply before beginning. "The history of the Sanders family is much more complicated than it seems, children. What happened to Rachel wasn't an impulse from Michael. It was planned." "What do you mean?" Rachel leaned forward. "Your father has been blackmailed for months. Some men discovered that he forged documents when he sold the family lands years ago. He sold properties that weren't entirely his, because part of the land was in your grandmother Mary's name, who never signed the sale." Jimmy was quickly writing everything down. "And what do the blackmailers want?" "They want him to transfer the deeds of the remaining lands to them. Lands that are worth a fortune today because there are plans to build a luxury resort in the region." Mrs. Louise paused to take a sip of coffee. "But there's a problem. When Mary died, she left these lands as an inheritance to the first female grandchild of the family." "To me," Rachel whispered, understanding. "Exactly. As long as you're alive and of legal age, your father can't sell these lands. That's why the blackmailers forced him to get rid of you." "My God!" Jimmy exclaimed. "So those men you saw in the cottage were the blackmailers' henchmen. They went to check if the job had been done." Mrs. Louise held Rachel's hand. "My child, you are in real danger. If they discover you're alive—" "But why did my father agree to do this? For money?" "Not just for the money. They have something else on him. Something that can completely destroy his reputation and send him to jail." The midwife hesitated. "It has to do with your mother's accident." Rachel felt the blood freeze in her veins. "What accident?" "My mother had a heart attack." "No, my child, your mother had a car accident and your father was driving drunk." The silence that followed was as heavy as lead. Rachel felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath. He killed my mother." "It was an accident, but he fled the scene and forged a medical report saying she had heart problems. The blackmailers discovered the truth and have proof." Thunder, who was grazing in the yard, suddenly raised his head and whinnied loudly. An alert sound. "Someone is coming." Mrs. Louise quickly stood up. "Jimmy, take Rachel to the back room. Thunder, go to the pasture behind the house." As they hid, they heard the sound of cars stopping in front of the house. Male voices, the same ones Rachel had heard in the cottage. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Louise. We're looking for a young woman who might be lost in the region. Have you seen anything strange around here?" "Lost young woman?" Mrs. Louise feigned surprise. "No, my son. Only me and Jimmy pass by here occasionally. We have information that she might be accompanied by a horse, a large animal with a light coat." "Horse? Ah, yes, I saw an animal like that yesterday. but it was heading toward Joe Benedict's farm about 5 kilometers from here. In the room, Rachel held Jimmy's hand tightly. For the first time since it all began, she understood the real dimension. Dave, the danger she was in. "What if they discover I'm here?" she whispered. "They won't discover," Jimmy replied with a determination she didn't expect. "Mrs. Louise knows how to take care of herself, and we'll find a way to prove the truth." "How?" "Your father may be a scoundrel, but he's still your father. If we can talk to him away from the blackmailers, maybe we can make a deal." "Are you crazy? He abandoned me for these people to kill me." "Maybe he had no choice. If the blackmailers threatened to expose his crime, he might have thought he was protecting you from a greater evil." Rachel shook her head, incredulous. "Protecting? By abandoning me in the middle of nowhere?" "Maybe he knew Thunder would find you. Maybe he counted on that." From the yard, they heard the cars leaving. Mrs. Louise knocked on the door of the room. "They're gone, but they haven't given up. They said they're going to search all the houses in the region." She entered the room worried. "You need to leave here." "Where to?" asked Rachel. "I know a safe place, an abandoned site in the mountains where no one will look. But first," Mrs. Louise looked directly into her eyes, "you need to decide what you want to do. Run forever or fight for the truth." Rachel looked out the window and saw Thunder waiting patiently in the pasture. The horse that had protected her family for decades, that had found her when she needed it most, that had brought back to light a story someone wanted to keep buried. "I want to fight," she said finally. "I want to discover the whole truth and get justice. For my mother, for my grandmother, and for all who were harmed by my father's crimes." Jimmy smiled. "Then we're going to need a plan, and it's going to be dangerous." "That's okay," Rachel held firmly the yellowed photo of her father with Thunder. "I've been through worse." The abandoned site where Mrs. Louise took Rachel and Jimmy was hidden among the mountains, accessible only by a steep trail that few knew. It was an old property, with a wooden house still solid, but covered by vegetation that had grown uncontrolled. "Over the years, here you'll be safe for now," said Mrs. Louise, helping Rachel get settled. "It belonged to my brother, who moved to Atlanta 10 years ago. Nobody comes here." Thunder grazed peacefully in the yard covered with weeds, finally relaxed after days of tension. His presence brought a feeling of security that Rachel hadn't felt for a long time. "And now," asked Jimmy, setting up transmission equipment he had brought from the radio, "how are we going to prove that the blackmailers exist and that your father is being forced to do these things?" "First, we need evidence," Rachel reflected, "and the only person who can give us that evidence is my own father. But he won't cooperate. If he talks, he'll go to jail. Maybe he'll cooperate if he knows I know everything, if he understands that running away won't solve anything anymore." Rachel paused. "Mrs. Louise, you said you know the truth about my mother's accident. Do you have proof?" The old midwife hesitated. "I have the testimony of a witness who was at the hospital that night, a nurse who saw your father arrive drunk, asking to alter the medical report." "Why didn't she report it at the time?" "Because Michael threatened her, said that if she spoke she would lose her job and never work in healthcare again." Mrs. Louise sighed. "Carmen was a widow with 3 small children. She couldn't afford to lose her job." "And is she still alive?" "She is. And when she learned you were in danger, she said she was willing to tell everything to the police." Jimmy clapped his hands. "So we have a witness. That changes everything." "It's not that simple," Mrs. Louise warned. "The blackmailers are dangerous people. If they discover that Carmen is going to speak, they might do something terrible to her." "What if we record a conversation?" suggested Rachel. "If I can get my father to confess everything in front of witnesses?" "How will you manage that?" "I'll turn myself in." "What?" Jimmy shouted. "Are you crazy? They'll kill you." "Not if I turn myself in publicly, in a place full of people where they can't do anything without being seen." Rachel turned to Mrs. Louise. "Tomorrow is Sunday. Is there a mass at the village church?" "There is at 9 in the morning. Why?" "Because my father always goes to Sunday mass. It's a matter of public image for him." Rachel smiled for the first time in days. "And if I show up there in front of the entire community, He'll have to listen to me. But the blackmailers, they won't do anything in front of 200 people. And if I tell the truth publicly during Mass, they won't have power over my father anymore. Jimmy reflected on the plan. It's risky, but it could work. I can bring the radio's recording equipment and register everything. And I'll invite Carmen to be present, added Mrs. Louise, in case we need her testimony. They spent the rest of the day planning every detail. Rachel wrote a speech she intended to make during Mass, telling the whole truth about the abandonment, the blackmailers, and her mother's accident. Jimmy tested the recording equipment and planned the best position to capture everything clearly. Tartuffe. Night, while dining on soup prepared by Mrs. Louise, Rachel observed Thunder through the window. The horse was standing near the house, as if standing guard. He knows tomorrow will be an important day, she commented. Thunder always had a sixth sense for these things, said Mrs. Louise. Your grandfather Vincent used to say this horse could see the future. And what do you think he sees in our future? Before Mrs. Louise could answer, Thunder whinnied loudly and came running toward the house. Jimmy quickly got up and looked out the window. Someone's coming. Cars climbing the trail. How did they discover where we are? Mrs. Louise asked, worried. It doesn't matter, Rachel quickly decided. Jimmy, get the equipment. Mrs. Louise, do you know another way out? There's a trail in the back that leads directly to the church, but it's too steep for the wheelchair. Thunder can take me, Rachel said, determined. If they want to find us, let's give them a surprise. The headlights of the cars were rapidly approaching. Jimmy carried the equipment on his back and helped Mrs. Louise exit through the back. Rachel held firmly to Thunder's mane as the horse carried her down the hill toward the village. You can do it, boy, she whispered in the animal's ear. We need to reach the church before they discover our plan. The descent was dangerous and frightening, but Thunder moved with the confidence of one who knew every rock on that path. In a few minutes they were at the back of the church, hidden among the trees. Now we need to wait, Rachel said to Jimmy, who had arrived running with Mrs. Louise. How long until Mass begins? About 10 hours, replied Mrs. Louise, but we can't stay here. They'll search the entire village. Then let's go into the church now. The priest always leaves it open for people to pray. Father Mike was organizing the songbooks when he saw them enter. He was a middle-aged man, known for his kindness and for never getting involved in local intrigues. Mrs. Louise, what are you doing here so early? Father, I need your help, Rachel said directly. My life is in danger, and the only way to save myself is to tell the truth to the entire community during Mass. Truth about what, my child? Mrs. Louise approached the priest. Mike, do you remember the accident of Michael Sanders' wife? Of course, a tragedy, sudden heart attack. It wasn't a heart attack. It was a car accident and Michael was drunk. Mrs. Louise quickly told the whole story, including the blackmail and Rachel's abandonment. The priest's face became increasingly serious as he heard the details. My child, he said to Rachel, are you sure you want to do this publicly? Once said there's no going back. I'm sure, Father. It's the only way to stop this madness. And if the men who are chasing you are at Mass? Even better. They'll hear everything I have to say. Father Mike reflected for a few moments. All right, you can speak during the parish announcements, but I want you to know that after this, your life will never be the same. My life has not been the same since my father abandoned me in the sugarcane field, Rachel replied. Now I just want justice. They spent the next few hours preparing. Jimmy hid the recording equipment near the altar. Mrs. Louise went out to fetch Carmen, the nurse who had witnessed the accident, and Rachel rehearsed her speech several times. Thunder remained in the churchyard, grazing peacefully, but always alert to any suspicious movement. When the first people began to arrive for the 9 o'clock Mass, Rachel hid in the sacristy, observing through the crack in the door. Her heart raced when she saw Michael enter the church, accompanied by 2 men whom she immediately recognized. They were the same ones who had invaded the cottage. They came together, she whispered to Jimmy. This confirms that my father is working with them. Or it confirms that he's being watched, Jimmy replied. Look how tense he seems. Indeed, Michael appeared to be a tormented man. His shoulders were hunched, his face pale, and he constantly looked around as if expecting something terrible to happen at any moment. The church gradually filled up. Mrs. Louise arrived with Carmen, a 50-year-old woman who seemed nervous but determined. Other families from the region were also present, including several that Rachel recognized from childhood times. "It's time," Father Mike whispered to her. "Are you still sure?" "Absolutely." "Then may God protect you, my child." The Mass began, normally, but Rachel noticed that the two henchmen didn't stop looking around, clearly searching for her. Michael, on the other hand, seemed concentrated on the prayers, as if seeking some kind of redemption. When the time came for the parish announcements, Father Mike signaled to her. "Before today's announcements," he announced, "a young woman from our community would like to share something important with all of us." Rachel took a deep breath and left the sacristy, maneuvering the chair toward the altar. The silence that fell in the church was absolute. Michael raised his head and turned even paler upon seeing her. "Dad," she said, her voice echoing off the ancient walls of the church, "it's time to tell the truth." The silence in the church was so deep that one could hear Michael's heavy breathing. He was as pale as a ghost, his hands trembling as he supported himself on the pew. The two men beside him moved restlessly, but could do nothing in front of the entire community. "My name is Rachel Sanders," she began, her voice firm, echoing through the church. "Daughter of Michael Sanders, that man there." She pointed to her father. "3 days ago, my own father took me to the middle of an abandoned sugarcane field and left me there to die." A murmur of shock ran through the congregation. Some people turned to look at Michael, who had lowered his head and covered his face with his hands. "But this isn't the first time my father has committed a crime. 15 years ago, he killed my mother." "That's a lie," Michael shouted, rising from the pew. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, I do, Dad. I know you were driving drunk the night my mother died. I know you crashed the car and that you fled the scene. I know you forged the medical report to hide the truth." The two henchmen also stood up, clearly uncomfortable with the public exposure. "Mr. Sanders," one of them whispered, "we need to leave here." "No," Michael replied, surprising everyone. "Enough. I can't take it anymore." He walked slowly toward the altar, where Rachel was. His eyes were full of tears. "You're right," he said, his voice breaking. I killed your mother. It was an accident, but I was driving drunk. And afterward I was too cowardly to take responsibility." The church exploded in murmurs. Father Mike called for silence. "Continue, Dad," Rachel said, her own voice choked with emotion. "Tell everything." "These men," Michael pointed to the henchmen, "discovered the truth 6 months ago. They blackmailed me, wanted me to transfer the family lands to them. But I couldn't do that because your grandmother had left the lands to you. So you decided to eliminate me." "No," Michael shouted. "That was never the intention. I thought that if you disappeared for a few days, I could gain time to find another solution." "Lies," interrupted one of the henchmen. "You knew exactly what would happen to her in the sugarcane field." "Shut up," Michael turned to the man. "You said you would just scare her that she would return home in a few days." "And you believed that?" The henchman laughed sarcastically. "You're more naive than we thought." At that moment, Mrs. Louise stood up from her pew. "Michael," she said loudly, "do you want to know why your daughter is alive? Because thunder found her. Your father's horse, which you abandoned 20 years ago, protected your daughter as you should have protected her." As if having heard its name, thunder appeared at the church door. The animal walked slowly down the central aisle, stopping beside Rachel. "Thunder?" Michael whispered, recognizing the horse. You're alive." The horse looked directly at him but didn't approach. Instead, it touched its muzzle to Rachel's shoulder in a protective gesture. "He saved me, Dad," Rachel said, caressing Thunder's mane. "He took me to my grandparents' cottage, protected me from the men you sent to find me, brought me to people who really care about me." Michael fell to his knees on the church floor. "Forgive me," he sobbed. "Forgive me, Rachel. Forgive me, Thunder. Forgive me. My father, my mother, my wife. Forgive me for having been a coward all my life." "Enough drama," shouted the taller henchman. "Let's go, Sanders. You've already said too much." "No." Michael stood up, wiping away the tears. "I'm not going with you anymore. It's over. You have no choice. If you don't come with us, we'll tell everything to the police." "Then tell them," Michael said, surprising everyone. "I've already told everything. This entire church heard my confession. I have nothing more to lose." "Yes, you do," the second henchman spoke for the first time. "You have your daughter. If you don't cooperate, she might suffer an accident." It was then that Jimmy stood up from his pew. "Too late," he said, showing the recorder. "Everything was recorded, including the threat you just made." The henchmen realized they were cornered. They tried to run, but several men from the community stood up and blocked the exit. "Nobody leaves here until the police arrive," said one of them. Father Mike approached the altar. "My brothers," he said, "we have just witnessed something very rare, the truth being revealed, sincere repentance and justice being done. Michael, you have committed terrible crimes, but your public confession shows there is still hope for redemption." Michael walked slowly to Rachel. "Daughter," he said, his voice choked, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I can't undo the harm I've done. But I want you to know that I always loved you. My hatred was never for you but for myself, for my cowardice, for my weakness." Rachel looked at him for a long moment. Tears ran down her face. "I love you too, Dad," she said finally. "But love doesn't justify the crimes you committed. You'll have to pay for them." "I know, and I will pay. But first, I want to do one right thing." Michael turned to the congregation. "The lands my parents left me, which I sold illegally, I will return to the community. I want them to be used to build a school, a health clinic, things that really matter." "And the lands that belong to Rachel?" asked Mrs. Louise. "They are hers, as they always were, as my mother wanted them to be." At that moment, the sound of sirens could be heard in the distance. Someone had called the police. Carmen, the nurse who had witnessed the original accident, stood up from her pew. "Michael Sanders," she said loudly, 15 years ago you threatened me not to tell the truth about the accident. Today, in front of all these people, I say, you arrived at the hospital that night drunk, asking to alter the medical report of your wife. You offered money to hide that she died in a car accident caused by you." "It's true," Michael confirmed. "Everything she said is true. The police entered the church and found an unusual scene, 2 men being restrained by the community, a businessman publicly confessing his crimes, and a young woman in a wheelchair next to a horse at the altar of the church." "Can someone explain what's happening here?" asked the sheriff. Father Mike stepped forward. "Sheriff, we have just witnessed confessions of crimes that happened 15 years ago and also 3 days ago. We have recordings of everything, witnesses, and the criminals themselves admitting their guilt." As the police arrested the henchman and placed Michael under arrest, Rachel remained beside Thunder, observing the scene. "It's over, boy," she whispered to the horse. "It's finally over." Thunder whinnied softly and rested its head on her shoulder. Then, to everyone's surprise, the horse walked over to Michael, who was being handcuffed. Michael looked at the animal that had belonged to his father, the horse he had abandoned so many years ago, just as he had abandoned so many other important things in his life. "Thank you," he whispered to Thunder. "Thank you for taking care of her when I didn't." The horse stared at him for a long moment, then turned and went back to Rachel's side. As Michael was being taken away by the police, he stopped one last time to look at his daughter. "Rachel," he said, "I promise I'll spend the rest of my life trying to repair the harm I've done. Not just to you, but to your mother, to my parents, to the entire community." "I hope so, Dad," she replied, "because second chances are rare, and you're getting yours." The church slowly emptied, but Rachel remained at the altar with Thunder, Mrs. Louise and Jimmy at her side. "And now?" asked Jimmy. "Now," said Rachel, looking at the yellowed photo she still carried in her pocket, "now I'm going to learn to truly live. I'll honor the memory of my mother and my grandparents. I'll take care of the lands that were left to me, and make sure they serve for the good of the community. And Thunder? Rachel smiled, the first time she had smiled sincerely in years. Thunder will stay with me. After all, we're a family now. A family that found each other in the sugarcane fields thanks to love that never dies, and truth that always finds a way to come to light. The sun came through the colored windows of the church, illuminating Rachel's face with a golden light. For the first time in her life, she felt truly free. 6 months later. The sound of the hammer echoed through the clear Saturday morning as volunteers from the community worked on the construction of the new school that would be built on the old lands of St. Francis Farm. Rachel observed the progress of the work from her wheelchair, with Thunder grazing peacefully beside her. "The school is going to be beautiful," commented Jimmy, who now worked as the official correspondent of the region for a larger radio station. "And to think it all started with those strange interferences on the radio." "It didn't start on the radio," Rachel corrected with a smile. "It started a long time ago, when my grandfather promised that these lands would always serve for the good of the community. It just took a few decades for the promise to be fulfilled." Mrs. Louise approached carrying a basket with sandwiches for the workers. "News from Michael?" asked Rachel. "I received a letter from him this week. He's doing well in prison, participating in the rehabilitation program. He said he's teaching other inmates to read and write." Mrs. Louise paused. "And that he's attending the support group for substance abusers. It's still hard to believe he really changed." "People can change, my child, especially when they face the consequences of their actions and decide to do differently. Your father lost everything he had built on lies, but perhaps he found something more valuable: peace of mind." Rachel nodded in agreement. She had visited her father a few times in prison, and she really noticed a difference in his eyes. The arrogance had been replaced by humility, the coldness by genuine repentance. And his accomplices? Sentenced to 10 years each. Their blackmail scheme was much more extensive than we imagined. They were extorting several families in the region. Jimmy showed the local newspaper. "The article I wrote about the case even won a regional journalism award." "Deserved," said Rachel. "If it weren't for you and your recording equipment, none of this would have been proven." Carmen, the nurse who had testified against Michael, approached the group. Since the trial, she had become one of Rachel's best friends. "How are the preparations for the inauguration?" she asked. "Almost ready. Next week the school will be functioning, the health clinic too, and—" Rachel made a dramatic pause. "The special surprise I prepared." "What surprise?" Jimmy asked, curious. "You'll have to wait and see," she answered with a mischievous smile. The group was interrupted by the arrival of an official car. From the vehicle stepped an elegant woman, approximately 40 years old, whom Rachel immediately recognized. "Dr. Patricia," she exclaimed. "I'm so glad you could come." The woman approached and greeted Rachel warmly. "I wouldn't miss the project inauguration for anything. When I received your invitation, I was moved to learn that you had decided to use the inheritance for something so noble." Mrs. Louise whispered to Jimmy, "Who is she?" "She's the lawyer who handled the entire legal process of the lands, but she's also a specialist in the rights of people with disabilities," Rachel explained. "She'll coordinate a new project here." "What project?" "A rehabilitation and inclusion center for people with disabilities, with physical therapy, occupational therapy, adaptive sports, professional training," Rachel paused, "and a special hippotherapy program." Everyone looked at Thunder, who raised its head as if it knew they were talking about him. "Thunder is going to help other people?" asked Jimmy. "He has already helped me so much. Now it's time to share this special gift of his with those who need it." Rachel caressed the horse's neck. "Isn't that right, boy?" Thunder whinnied softly and rubbed its muzzle against her hand. Dr. Patricia opened a folder and showed the plans for the project. "We'll have specially trained horses, qualified professionals, and adapted facilities to serve people with the most diverse types of disabilities. It will be the largest center of its kind in rural Georgia." "And who will finance all this?" Mrs. Louise asked. Part comes from the legal sale of the lands that belonged to Michael, explained Rachel. Another part from donations we received, and a third part, she smiled, from a very special source. At that moment, another car arrived at the site. From it descended a man of approximately 50 years, well-dressed, whom Rachel introduced to the others. Everyone, this is Mr. Robert Silver. He is... The businessman who was trying to buy the lands through the blackmailers, Robert interrupted, embarrassed. I didn't know about the criminal methods that were being used, I swear. When I discovered the truth, I was horrified, and decided to do the right thing, Rachel completed. I decided to donate the same amount I would have paid for the lands to the project. It's the least I can do to repair my involuntary participation in this story. Jimmy shook his head, impressed. It's amazing how everything worked out. It didn't work out by itself, Mrs. Louise said wisely. It worked out because brave people decided to do the right thing, even when it was difficult. In the afternoon, as the group rested, in the shade of a large tree, Rachel received an unexpected call. Hello? Rachel, this is your father. Dad, how did you manage to call? It's the weekly call I'm entitled to. I wanted to congratulate you on the school inauguration. I heard about it from the news. Thank you, Dad. Rachel, I wanted to tell you that I'm proud of you, more proud than I've ever been of anything in my life. You took the worst of me and transformed it into the best of you. Tears began to roll down Rachel's face. Dad, you're changing too. That makes me happy. When I get out, here in a few years, I hope to be able to help with your project. I don't know if you'll want me to, but of course I'll want you to, Dad. Everyone deserves a second chance. I love you, daughter. For the first time in my life, I can say that and really feel what it means. I love you too, Dad. After hanging up, Rachel remained silent for a few minutes, watching Thunder play with a foal that had recently been born on the neighboring farm. Is everything okay? Asked Jimmy. It's more than okay. It's perfect. She breathed deeply, the pure country air. You know, for years I felt as if my life had stopped at that accident that left me in a wheelchair, as if I had died that day and just continued existing. And now? Now I understand that accident wasn't the end of my life. It was the beginning of my true story. If it wasn't for it, my father would never have abandoned me in the sugarcane field. If he hadn't abandoned me, I would never have found Thunder. If I hadn't found Thunder, the whole truth would never have come to light. Mrs. Louise smiled. As I always say, everything happens for a reason. No, Rachel corrected. Things don't happen for a reason. We find reasons for the things that happen, and we make those reasons the fuel to build something better. The sun began to set, tinting the sky with golden and orange hues, the same light that, 6 months ago, had illuminated the despair of a young woman abandoned in the middle of a sugarcane field, now illuminated the hope of a woman who had transformed her pain into purpose. Thunder approached and rested its head on Rachel's shoulder. In the reflection of the horse's eyes, she could see not only her own face, but also the faces of all those who had been touched by her story. The children who would study at the new school, the patients who would be treated at the health clinic, the people with disabilities who would find new hope at the rehabilitation center. Thank you, boy, she whispered. Thank you for finding me when I was lost. Thank you for showing me the way home. Thunder whinnied softly as if saying, You're welcome. That's what your grandfather taught me, to protect the family always, no matter how much time passes. As the first stars began to appear in the sky, Rachel Sanders, the young woman who had been abandoned to die in a sugarcane field, smiled at the future. A future she herself had chosen to build, a future where the wounds of the past were transformed into bridges for a better tomorrow. And in the middle of that field, that was once a symbol of abandonment and despair, but that now represented hope and new beginnings, a woman, a horse, and an entire community proved that true love, be it between people, between generations, or between a person and an animal, is capable of overcoming any adversity and transforming even the most painful stories into tales of hope. The canes of the sugarcane field swayed gently in the wind, whispering ancient secrets and promising that no matter how dark the night, there will always be a new dawn. If this story interested, you don't forget to subscribe.